Hey Wolfpack, it's finally Saturday, and I know you've all been waiting for more stories. So tonight I bring you 3 more Hitman stories. I hope you all enjoy, and always watch your back. With that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. I don't think there is a need for me to delay my story with random facts. I'll cut right through the chase. My work nickname is James and I'm a hitman. I've been in business for a long time. Specifically, for 13 years, 8 months, 14 days, and around 5 hours if I'm not mistaken. I hate that I forgot the exact time I started working, but really, if I stood too much in every imperfection of my messy life, I would have already committed suicide. I can't say that I particularly enjoy my job. I do not by any means hate it, however. It is just what I'm good at. It pays the bills, and when done right, it fills me with a great sense of relaxation and completion. How is killing people calming, you might ask? Well, let me tell you my other distinct characteristic, and hopefully you'll understand. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 9 years old. I find it particularly funny that every single person who likes geometry and order diagnoses themselves with OCD. Oh my god, I just can't have that label on the back of my t-shirt hanging out. I definitely have OCD. And all that stuff. No, it is definitely not like this. The human mind likes to see patterns in neatly made environments. So, it is basically programmed to enjoy such things. You are not obsessive-compulsive. You are a normal, functioning human being that likes to draw attention to itself. Now, let me tell you how I deal with my disorder before we move on. OCD is a spectrum, and I consider myself one of the lucky people who, although suffer from it, are not completely debilitated. I have seen cases of people that cannot move out of their beds from fear of ruining some small piece of their self-made perfection. I wouldn't say I have it easy myself, but I can manage. It is all part of having a good schedule, and never ruining the daily routine. Although the world is very, very untidy and chaotic, I have the ability to close in on myself and survive, albeit with copious amounts of stress. I have some bad days that the routine doesn't go as I want it, and I find me bashing myself for my worthlessness. I mean, how can I look myself in the mirror if some of my hairs are refusing to get in place? It's just hideous. Now, although I managed to live a happy life in my house with a relatively normal life, aided with some medication, it was always difficult for me to find a job. You see, employers do ask for perfect workers, but they really don't know what they are wishing for. I remember the first job I got, probably the worst. It was in a factory that made stamps and advertisement stickers. I worked my hardest to make the product perfect, but the machines always disappointed me. One color didn't look right, something was not geometrically correct, and thousands of other problems. One color didn't look right, something was not geometrically correct, and thousands of other problems. But my biggest problem was when I did manage to get my part perfectly, but someone else carelessly made a mistake and wouldn't understand my concerns. I remember the time I had nailed my part and then looked at the finished product, where the image was tilting around 1 degree relative to the sticker background. It was unbearable. I yelled for my supervisor to stop the production and showed him what I meant. The response I got was laughable. Everybody said it was fine and nobody would ever even see it. But it was just right there. I mean, if I was a customer, I would never trust such an irresponsible and messy company. It was the accumulation of many cases like this that led to me being fired. Honestly, it was for the better. I couldn't stand working in this mess. Many jobs followed with similar outcome. I was either fired or quitting because the untidy and dirty environment was giving me huge injections of stress. It took me a lot of search and some shady websites to find a training camp for assassins. At first, I laughed at the idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it grew in me. It may have been the advertisement slogan that did the job. You will become perfect for the perfect job. Perfection. The only thing I struggled for, since I could walk. But it was always slipping right through my fingers. I didn't, of course, believe 100% that this would solve my problems, but I figured that doing something new could possibly make me interested enough to forget my psychological struggle. Luckily, I had a good background in martial arts and gun training. Back in the day, it was the way my late parents had found for me to gain a better control over my mind and body. Now, I know there's a lot of debate on whether a person with OCD should be trained like this as a young teenager, but at the moment, I was very thankful for my parents. I spent a few months refreshing my skills, and then applied and got accepted for the program. It would last 2 years, all expenses paid and then some. It would be an understatement to say that these 2 years were the worst of my life. It wasn't the physical demand of my training. No, it was having to live with other people. Their standards of personal hygiene and tactfulness were way below average, and it wasn't only that I had to train with them, I also had to live with 2 roommates. Many a times I wish I could practice what I learned right there with them, and sometimes I admit I got pretty close to doing so. I did, however, enjoy what I did somewhat. My mind was getting busy, and I realized that the more I struggled to find the cleanest and most silent way to clear my targets, the more relief I felt. During my successful practice sessions, I would return happy and barely cared about the scraps of food left on the sink left by one of the useless roommates. It was quickly obvious that I was of different caliber than anyone else there, and top of the class as you would expect. I finished my training right on time, and started getting contracts by the company who housed the camp. Of course, at first, the targets were relatively easy with low profiles and minimum protection. Now, every hitman has a signature move, or so to say. For me, it was easy to find it. I really didn't like weapons, as they leave too much of a mess for me to clean up after. Physical violence also had to be avoided, since it also leaves a bloody scene, and I hate having to see a disfigured victim. No, for me, it came to strangulation. It was the neatest way I figured out how to use. It leaves next to nothing as evidence, and of course, the body of the target remains intact. I'm sorry, but I can't see deformed or amputated people, especially when they are my targets. It really ruins my sense of symmetry. And this is how I work, always having everything in perfect order. I make perfectly sure that all my tracks are covered. I cover my hands with plastic gloves, and also have my already short hair covered so that nothing can be found. Every time I successfully finish off a target, I make sure to meticulously clean every part of the scene, not only for my safety, but for my own peace of mind. So far, everything has been going according to plan. I find it very relaxing to create a perfect plan before undertaking a job. This helps me calm down and ensure that every last detail is exactly how I planned it, and I never fail. The targets get considerably more important as the years passed by. So did my paycheck. But my last target was different, and for the first time, I was honestly grateful for my disorder, since I truly believe that it was the only reason I am here to tell you the story. The job offer was, as usual, a text message including the target's names and whereabouts with some other facts. No further details, but for the first time, the text message concluded with a word that I hadn't seen before in such a contract. It was a single word, saying, "Beware." I wasn't very fazed, but it was a bit troublesome. My employers had complete trust in me, and were never afraid of me not finishing the job. I didn't really care though. The money I would get from this contract would be enough for me to live about a year without working. After I set my eyes on my target, I was surprised to find out that he was blind. This, combined with the fact that he had practically no security personnel, made me rethink the text I had received. I wouldn't let my guard down, of course, but it did seem like a joke now more than ever before. It took me around 2 weeks to figure out a perfect setup for the job, but in the end, I was almost happy with what I had come up with. Of course, I always feel somewhat insecure about anything I do, as I always have the intense need to recheck and improve my plans. But over the years, I managed to calm myself down and enjoy my success. It was relatively easy to break into the house. Once in, I moved in silence, and found my target sitting in his armchair like he usually did this time of the day, listening to music. I knew it would be the best time for me to attack, as he was already minus one basic sense and his ears were distracted elsewhere. I approached quickly, and I was ready to put the guitar string I use around his neck. But just a second before I could lock him in the deathlock, I felt an immense pain in my wrist, and then I was thrown away in the back of the room. It took me a minute to understand that the bastard had grabbed me and thrown me away with one arm. Still dizzy from the fall, I watched my target turn and walk towards me. While having his one arm on the wall, he was around 55 years old, with white hair. His body looked very muscular and fit for his age, although he was hunching a bit. I really couldn't understand how such an old man was so strong, however. He started talking, while slowly walking towards me. "I've been expecting you," he proclaimed. "I know how long you've been stalking me. I noticed you following the very first day you started doing so. Did you honestly think that just because I was blind, I would be an easy target? No. I would be long dead if it were so easy. You see, you are not the first to come here. Didn't you wonder why they had you, of all, come and kill me?" I wasn't going to sit there and listen to his monologue, so I pulled the gun I always have with me just in case of emergencies. I shot him, or whatever it was, but to my horror, the bullets bounced on his body and didn't faze him at all. What the hell was this thing? I had no other option but to fight him. I tried to find a weapon around the house, something sharp to impale him with, but nothing seemed to make him bleed. It was like his skin was made out of stone. I had studied the layout of his house meticulously, but I reached a point that I couldn't avoid the man-beast behind me. I couldn't understand how, but it seemed that he was able to navigate via hearing or his sense of smell. I was trapped. He managed to grab me. He lifted me in the air with his hands, while simultaneously crushing my ribs. "Now, I will destroy you, just like I destroyed all the others before you." This was my chance. With trembling arms, I reached the hidden pocket I had on the inside of my jacket and pulled out a hand grenade, taking the safety off at the same time. I would never, ever use a hand grenade, as the attention and destruction it caused would be terrible for my job and for my well-being itself. But to be honest, that text message and its ominous ending had a strong effect on me. That night, just a few hours ago, I was about to go without it, but while leaving the hotel that was accommodating me, I felt something was wrong. It was typical for my condition. It was this little voice telling me that I probably had forgotten something unlocked in the house. That little voice that always forces me to go recheck everything I have already double-checked. Something is missing. I had tried to choke the little voice out and almost continued on my way, but for some reason, I just couldn't ignore it. I turned back, risking to ruin my timing completely. I picked the grenade and hid it in my jacket and then went back to finishing my task. So here I was, with an unlocked grenade in my palm, getting crushed by something that wasn't a man nor a monster. It was do or die at this moment. He didn't notice my move, being that he was drunk from the thrill of the hunt. As he was talking, I shoved the grenade in his open mouth and pushed it deep in his throat, choking him with it. He was overcome with panic and he let me go, as he was trying to get the little time bomb out of his throat. I ran as far as I could and jumped out the window I had gotten in. The moment he exploded in a mess of flesh, pieces of intestines and blood, I laid there for a minute covered in blood. The adrenaline rush too strong for me to care about the mayhem. I feel like it was the first time in my life that my OCD failed to kick in. To my horror, however, I saw that I had lost half my right ring finger in the struggle, and in the heat of the moment, I hadn't realized. I let out a sigh, knowing full well that the torture that is a messy life would haunt me more than ever before, every time that I would look at my hand from now on. If I wasn't in such a shock, I would laugh from the irony. I managed to escape. Things were on the news next week, but by the time I was long gone, I don't think I will ever be caught. But it was my messiest job yet. I thought of stopping this job, as I was still shocked by my experience, but my obsessive need to do orderly things and take my mind out of its usual misery was even more demanding now that I look like a freak in my eyes. And this is my story. I still undertake assassinations for a reward that I find adequate. I do believe that with the information I have left here, a very decisive client would be able to find me. So, if you need to take out somebody tactfully and without the slightest chance of failure, don't hesitate to call me. Michael Zazinski wasn't my usual type of client. He wasn't a spurred lover looking for revenge, or a murderer looking to snuff out the witnesses to his crime, or a husband hungry for his wife's insurance policy. He was just an ordinary guy looking out for his sister. I wouldn't normally resort to such drastic measures, but Harold has become so awful, treats her like garbage, doesn't give a rat's ass about her, or anything, except for that stupid band he sings in with his work buddies. He blew his nose loudly. You understand that, right, Switchblade? I winced. That's just my alias, Michael. You shouldn't, actually call me that in casual conversation. Then, what should I call you? I blinked. Clearly, he had never done anything like this before. Do you have the cash? His eyes darted around the diner. Then, from his pocket, he pulled out a wad of $100 bills. You can't just... They'll see it. They'll see it. I hastily threw him one of the napkins. Wrap it up in that, and do it discreetly. He wasn't discreet, but thankfully, the diner was nearly empty at this hour. It's twice your usual rate, he whispered, very loudly. I wanted to give you a big tip, so you'll do a good job. A tip? You're not ordering an ice cream cone, Michael. You're ordering a hit. But I took the cash, smiled, and buried it deep in my pocket. And I don't want you to kill him. What? Michael, you know I'm a hitman, right? Yes, but Nancy needs his income. She's been a housewife for the past 20 years. No work experience, no education, past high school. There's no way she could support herself on her own. You could support her with the cash you just gave me. He shook his head. I've tried. She won't let me. She cares too much. I sighed. Well, okay. I suppose I did take you up on this job. What do you even want me to do to him, if not kill him? I don't know. Scare him? Threaten him? Just make him stop being so terrible to her. But it's risky business. I mean, he'll know what I look like, and you'll go on Sunday morning. He'll be napping alone in the house. Won't even see you come in. Michael looked down at the table and then added, It's the only time he's ever alone in the house. The only time he lets her leave. My belligerence evaporated, and I felt a pang of sympathy. It's that bad. He nodded. Okay, I'm in. The house was a tiny little thing, shoved into the gap between a massive brownstone and a dilapidated food mart. It would be a challenge to do it without any witnesses. Good. I like a challenge. I snuck through the backyard, creatively using the various brushes and fencing to hide the onlookers. I then stepped into the open window, like Michael told me to. The knife was heavy in my hands. I turned left at the kitchen and crept into the living room. In the center stood a microphone, a music stand, and some sheet music, presumably for Harold and his band. Nancy's needlepoint supplies were pushed into the corner, taking up as little space as they possibly could. I walked into the next room, and there, in the armchair, sat Harold, fast asleep. I retrieved the chloroform from my pocket. With the grace of a dancer, I lay it against his nose, and then I set to work. I visited Nancy myself a few weeks later. I like to do that sometimes. Pose as a friendly neighbor, see how their lives have changed in the wake of my work. Yes, I know it increases my chances of getting caught, but, as I said, I like a challenge. When she flung open the door, her eyes were bright, and she wore a smile. Hi, I'm Smith Baker, I said. I just moved here a few houses away from you, behind the food mart.
Oh, how nice. Please come in.
She led me into the living room and I smiled. The music stand and other equipment were thrown haphazardly in the corner. Nancy's needlepoint was sprawled across the sofa, taking up as much space as it possibly could.
Smith, this is my husband, Harold.
He just stared at me, still, silent, pale. And then he started shaking wildly, clawing at the raw red mark across his throat. She sat down.
Oh, sorry. I should explain.
She sat down with a small smile.
He's not trying to be rude. It's just that, well, he had an accident a few weeks ago, and now he can't speak, I'm afraid.
She patted his arm, comfortingly, as he clung to her.
Or sing, unfortunately.
An accident. That mysteriously cut his vocal cords and left the rest of him untouched. I could see Harold's hand shaking, his lip trembling. I wonder if he was thinking about the first thing I said to him when the chloroform wore off. If you don't treat Nancy right, I'll do this again. And next time, you'll lose more than just your voice. I smiled at Harold. Would you like a cookie? I asked, holding out the tray. I baked them myself. I had been humiliated enough. My ex-father-in-law, the CEO of the company that I work for, had made it his mission to make my life a living hell ever since his bitch of a daughter divorced me and took everything I owned, giving me bullshit assignments, discreetly spreading lies and rumors about me, and even sending his roid-raging son after me as an intimidation tactic. After half a year of this, I came to the conclusion that something had to be done. My ex-father-in-law had to die. I live in a pretty small town, and I had never been in a situation like this before. I didn't even know where to start. One thing was clear though, I wouldn't be getting any actual blood on my hands. I went to a former coworker of mine who had a little bit more of experience with this sort of thing. He referred me to a friend of his, who I visited next, which led to me getting the name of a hitman named Cobra. He told me the name of the bar that the man usually frequented, and told me to be casual and be very careful if I managed to figure out which patron he actually was. I went to the bar for 5 days straight before I had begun to give up hope. Sometimes there were multiple men who looked like they could even be stone-cold killers, and sometimes the bar would be damn near empty. I had no idea what to do, or how to go about things. So, one night, in exasperation, I sat in a stool next to a shorter gentleman and ordered a whiskey coke and 2 shots. "Long week?" the man asked, his dark eyes staring straight ahead at the bottles of liquor before us at the bar. "You have no idea," I muttered, not exactly wanting to be bothered at the moment. The man, who had a tattoo of a snake on his neck, shrugged and replied, "I mean, I kinda do. You've been here all week, looking for someone." I glanced at him as the bartender brought my drinks. "You've been here, watching me?" "Not watching, but my eyes always stay open. You might be able to call me paranoid, considering my former line of work." My eyes went from the snake tattoo to the man's bearded face, and it clicked. Had I finally gotten incredibly lucky, just as I was about to give up? "You're Cobra, aren't you?" I said in excitement, and the man gave me a suddenly vicious glance. His lips curled into a snarl. "Why don't you say it a little louder? Japan didn't hear you." "Sorry," I mumbled, casting my eyes down in shame. I have a problem that I need to get rid of." "I'm sure you do. Find somebody else." "What?" "Who told you where to find me?" he asked, finishing his rum and monitoring the bartender for another. "A guy named Melvin." "Well, Melvin should have told you that I'm done. Retired." "Retired? How? Hitmen just don't retire," I whispered, leaning in closer to him. Cobra gave me another look, and I could see sorrow in his dark eyes. "You ever met a hitman before?" To avoid answering the question, I took a swig of my whiskey. We sat in silence for a moment, and then I tried again. "Please, he's an older gentleman. He won't be that hard to get rid of. I have quite a bit of money I could—" "I don't care about your money. I quit a long time ago for a reason, buddy. Cobra took a long drink and put his half-empty glass down. I've seen things, and I've done things, that no man should ever see. I gave a toast to myself and downed one of my shots. Licking my lips, I turned my head towards him. Well, I don't have shit else to do tonight. I wouldn't mind hearing a story or two. Like you said, I've never met a hitman before. Cobra finished his drink and looked at me again. Buy me a drink and I'll tell you a few stories from hell. A rum on the rocks for my friend here, I said to the bartender, then took another swig of my whiskey. Alright, there. I'll buy you another as long as you don't bullshit me. Cobra laughed, a humorless sound. If only I had bullshit to tell. Maybe my life would be a lot easier. I'm not going to tell you my life story, obviously, since that's not smart of any hired gun to do. But I will tell you that none of it gave me any pleasure. There are sickos out there who relish taking human lives, but I feel like I've lost a piece of my own soul for every soul I've released. I stared down at the bar, feeling my buzz starting to come on. And how many, souls have you released? 37, Cobra said without hesitation. He laughed again. Or maybe 43, depending on how you look at things. What do you mean? That makes no sense. I've killed men, I've killed women, and I've killed children. I've killed teachers, doctors, police officers, and 10-year-olds. I've seen so much death that I don't believe life isn't truly worth living anyway. Death is here to take everyone, except for one. Cobra drank from the rum that I had ordered him. I fingered the rim of my second shot glass, looking inquisitively at him. What do you mean? Is that supposed to be an analogy or something? I mean what I say. There's a thing out there that doesn't die. I haven't talked about it with anyone before, and you probably won't believe me anyway, but you asked. The first time I came into contact with the beast was because of a man named Eddie. Eddie hired me to kill a man who, he said, had tortured his wife and robbed him for over $50,000. He didn't believe in the justice system. He just wanted the man dead. Cobra finished his drink. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand before continuing. Finding this man, who he called Clay, was easy enough. I put a bullet in his head, his heart, and his crotch. Per request from Eddie, I left this man lying in a pool of blood, dead as a doornail. I downed my whiskey shot and nodded, wondering where this was going. Fast forward 8 months. I'm hired by a woman who says her husband has been beating her. He's threatened to tear their unborn child out of her stomach and feed it to the dog. He's a real monster, she says, and she wants him dead. I had never been afraid before in my life, not until the day I saw this man who I had already killed, living and breathing. I knew it wasn't a look-alike. I knew it wasn't some relative or something. I never forget a face. The aura that this thing emitted. Chilling. When I came into the back door that his wife had left unlocked, I found Clay sitting at the kitchen table. When he saw me, there was first surprise, then glee in his beady eyes. I knew that he had recognized me, and I knew that he knew I was scared. I wasted no time. I shot him 15 times this time. I stomped on his head just to be sure that he didn't come back, but he did. Cobra glanced down at the floor, sniffling. I would see him in my dreams, hear the cries of his victims. Oh, and his victims were many. Old Eddie? Dead. Clay's wife, found lying in a park with her throat gashed so deeply it was a wonder her head was still attached. Huey, a disgruntled neighbor, they found him in several pieces all over his house. In total, I was hired to kill Clay 6 times. 6 times I killed him, and 6 times he came back. There were never any news reports of a body being found. Hell, I even chopped him up myself once, put him in a bag, and threw him into the ocean. But always, he came back. Always, he killed again, did terrible, terrible things again. He isn't of this world. My own hands were trembling now. I glanced behind myself nervously, then back at the hitman. Surely he was lying. Was this just a story made up to discourage me from trying to kill my ex-father-in-law? If so, Cobra's acting was on point. Do you know where he is now? Cobra continued staring at the floor. He shook his head, digging into his pocket and pulling out cash. I don't, nor do I want to know. It feels as though he was seeking me out, you know? What are the chances I'm hired to kill the same guy? 6 times. I've thought about it a lot, a whole lot. Maybe he is death itself, come to teach me who is really in charge here. Maybe he is a demon sent from hell by my victims to bring about my own reckoning. I don't know. I just knew the surest way to avoid seeing him again was just to stop killing. He put his cash on the bar and stood up, looking at me closely. If you see my face on the news, kid, just know that it was probably him. As far as the problem that you want to get rid of, find an alternative. Murder is not the way to go. We are disgusting creatures. With that, Cobra turned and walked out of the bar. I have never seen him again, though. Thanks for watching, Wolfpack. If you want to submit your story, my email and subreddit will be in the description below. And also, if you're not subscribed, please do if you want. And don't forget to like and comment as well. Have beautiful nightmares. And I will see you next time.